This is the MBN Data Science Technology Meetup. So my name's Josh. I'm the Client Acquisition Lead here at MBN Solutions. And I'm really pleased to welcome Martin, who's the Director of Advanced Analytics at Pets at Home. So Martin's going to be presenting on identifying and how to build skills in your team and creating great analysts. So he's got a fantastic presentation. He's going to go through that with us. Over to you, Martin.
Cool. Thanks very much. Right. Good afternoon, everybody. As I just said, I'm Martin and I look after analytics at Pets at Home. I've been doing this stuff for more years than I care to remember, I guess. Now, I'm probably old enough to remember when I had to convince marketing directors that they wanted and needed analytics rather than the current situation, which is definitely almost having to convince marketing directors that analytics can't solve every problem they've got. But things have definitely moved on, I think, over the last 10 years. And we're definitely in the age of analytics. And I love this quote from the guys at Google that data is the sword of the 21st century, those who wield it well, the samurai. And this is certainly the sort of attitude that makes data so important within retail. When you get into kind of how does that translate into what that actually means for retail, I kind of like some information from a report that I got from IBM a few years ago. And IBM talked about the winners within retail over the next 10 years will definitely be the companies that get three things right. One of them is having access to, in IBM's opinion, the most data. I actually think that's probably better as the best data rather than most, but that's a minor kind of quibble. Who has the best ability to garner insight and act on that data, and then who can execute the best with those insights at moment of truth. And I think those last two, that you could spend half an hour talking about any of these, but this one mostly concentrates on how do you build a high quality insight and analytics team that can gather that insight and enable a business to act on it. And given that this has been around for a while, we still have a number of problems as an industry trying to actually really drive towards success in this area. And then one of the big ones is there's not enough samurai. Quite simply, we still have a shortage of analysts and analytical talent, and it's still really difficult to recruit for people. And none of this is new news. This is at least a 10-year-old problem. So I think the first report to really bring this highlights was McKinsey's big data report, which talked about a shortage in America of 150,000 data scientists within 10 years and 1.5 million managers and analysts to interpret that data. And that report's 10 years old this year. The Harvard Business Review that said data analytics and data science was the sexiest job of the 21st century, 9 years old this year. Competing in Analytics, Davenport's book, that's even older. That's about 2007, I think. So this problem's been around for a while, and you'd think we'd have kind of figured it out by now, but we still aren't really getting there. And there's frustrations, I think, both from organizations in terms of being frustrated they can't get value, and analysts frustrated that the job definitely isn't the sexiest job. So from a corporate viewpoint, there's still far more projects fail and far more companies not yet driving value from data. Gartner currently believe that 85% of data science projects fail. And a recent report from Dimensional Research reckons that only about 4% of companies have really succeeded in deploying machine learning in a production environment, which are both depressing numbers in their own right. So there's a lot of companies still feeling really frustrated. I think more the point for this as well, the data science as the sexiest job of the 21st century just doesn't look all that sexy for a lot of analysts. There's a lot of very unhappy people out there. And you can see that empirically in survey data on the current state of the data analytics job market. So data released last year said the average data scientist or analyst only remains in their role for around 2 years, and 75% are either actively looking for a re-role or open to one if it's suggested. So a massive amount of churn and a massive amount of frustration. And really it comes down to a big gap between expectation and reality. There's a real problem that we're recruiting people, growing teams, and not setting them up for success, and therefore not driving the value from them. So what do we do about it? So far, it's a fairly obvious statement to the fact that the job market's tough and people are struggling to get value. But that again isn't really a surprise. What I'm going to spend most of the next kind of 25 minutes talking about is three things, a couple at a high level and one in a bit more detail, as to what I think are some of the areas people struggle and what can be done about it. The first one the first two are about really leadership in the analytics space. And one of the things I struggle with is a lot of ads and a lot of agencies, a lot of clients seem to want to recruit people to lead insight teams where almost a PhD is a basic requirement. The ability to still hands-on write code in a variety of languages, the technical skills are still required. Yet often I think that's actually not what really the leadership element is around in this sort of environment. To me, the leadership is being able to manage and marry up supply and demand. So on the demand side, it's around actually being able to work out what the organization needs and then work out how data and analytics supports delivery of that. I spent a little time working for myself around 18 months ago, 2 years ago now, and I was approached by a number of organizations that wanted a data strategy. And the amount of them, when you ask them, right, okay, what's your actual strategy? That kind of went, well, and there really wasn't a clear overall strategy. And that worries the hell out of me, because I think that doesn't set people up for success. Hence the Cheshire Cat kind of quote that if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't really matter which direction you go. A data strategy isn't a holy grail for not having a strategy. The data strategy should serve an overall strategy. Once you've got a strategy in place, the analytics leadership needs to work out how do we take data and analysis and deliver that strategy, rather than being a silver bullet to solve the problem that you haven't really figured out what your strategy is. And I think too many organizations are still in that stage of wanting data and analytics because everybody wants data and analytics, so surely they should, without really knowing what it's going to do for them. And I think that's a really key first stage to get in place, is understand what analytics is going to deliver for your organization and how it supports your plan. The supply side is, again, understanding the business analysis process. So you need to know enough about the supply side to know how it works and know how stuff gets delivered, even if you're not hands-on anymore. But it's around understanding what you need to build and how you need to deliver it, rather than necessarily being the person that's written 240 lines of code in the last hour. You can take a number of processes for this, and I don't think it really matters which one. But I think the interesting bit is that they all are reasonably the same at a basic level. So the two I've just put up on here are PPDAC and the CRISP DM process. And they all, and you could take any one you want or mix and match them, but they all pretty much start from, what's the question you're trying to solve? What's your business problem? Understand the problem, understand how the analyst thinks he's going to go and solve that and get hold of the data, do the analysis, and then go and actually present it and drive action from it. And all of them follow a very similar pattern of understand issue, what are you going to do it, and actually carry out the action. Once you understand that and how you're going to do that for what purpose, that I think puts you in a far better position to try to build an identikit of what data roles do you really need, rather than just trying to pile out there and say, right, we need half a dozen data scientists. You can actually start to say, what is it we actually need to look for? How do we recruit the right skills? And how do we train and develop people so they don't wander off in 2 years? And I think the key tool that I found most useful for this is to have a solid competency framework, which lets you understand the key skills you need and how people develop within that skill set, so they can see what they need to do to move forward and improve and actually measure their increased success. And for anybody who's thinking competency framework is one of these obscure HR terms as to what it is, I think at a basic level, it's really simple. If I look at something like Dungeons and Dragons or World of Warcraft, and I'm talking to a data analytics audience, I refuse to believe that no one in here will have played Dungeons and Dragons. You're basically talking about how do you level up your analysts. This is how do you go from the kind of level one beginner in a cotton shirt with a stick into some kind of 120th level paladin. It's we're trying to make analytics paladins basically. It is skilling people up. And while you might think that's a kind of flippant analogy in some ways, it kind of, when you think about it, most of these games are built on what skills does your character need, and how do you build more skills into there. So yeah, for the Dungeons and Dragons, strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. It's not necessarily the skills I'm actually looking for in data scientists. Well, actually, intelligence and wisdom would be useful. Charisma probably less so. I'm not too bothered how much constitution they've got, as long as they can actually get into the office occasionally. But it is how you work out for your organization what those skills are. And it will be different for every organization because it depends exactly what you want. But I think there's certain skills which are very common and will fit in a lot of frameworks. I'm just going to spend a bit of time wandering through 5 of those key skill sets which I'd expect to be in most frameworks. And the first one is business and market understanding. So as I've seen that everybody's company will use slightly different language, slightly different cultural ways of referring to things. But this is about understanding your markets and competitors, understanding how your organization operates in those markets to meet customer needs and create value or profit. Some people would call it domain expertise. I don't tend to call it domain expertise, mostly because I'm not convinced that's absolutely 100% what it is. Pardon me. Domain expertise, if you just want to recruit people who are experts in your industry, when you do get people leave, it's difficult to recruit for them. You narrow your recruitment pool. I've worked, I guess, over the years with enough of the McKinseys, Mercers, and Accentures to know that what they're good at is sending bright young things in who've absolutely got the skill set to interrogate, interview, and suck out of people all of the information about a particular domain. And I think that consultancy skill set and how you develop those consultancy skills are the key in here. You want people who can take a brief and go speak to half a dozen experts and really become solidly grounded quite quickly. The second skill, I think, is business partnering. And again, this is about the softer skills of analytics. So creating value partnerships to drive data and analysis-based decision-making. Within a couple of these, I'll talk about as well as the individual skills, there's different levels of the skill that you might differentiate, say, an analyst from a senior analyst, from a principal analyst at. And within here, you might have 3 tiers. So for example, at a basic level, it could be about demonstrating understanding of why the business asks the question it asks and sees issues through the lens of a business area. Moving to a slightly more senior level, you could be looking for something that you might describe as confidently takes a brief and challenges the thinking to understand the real driver for the request rather than just understanding it. And moving a little further on, quickly and effectively translates a business issue or opportunity into a meaningful data-led solution. So basically not being required on a brief, but more that people can come to somebody with just a problem and go, this is keeping me awake at night. I've got no idea why. Can you help me find it out? So that different level of partnership as you become more senior and more experienced. The third one is technical mastery. And I think this is the one where too many organizations get very hung up and actually just recruit technical. I do believe you need some degree of technical expertise, absolutely, but you don't need to be Yoda. You can't get away with being Jar Jar bloody Binks either, but you definitely don't need to be Yoda. But what I mean by that is, in a lot of areas, you've got this lengthy list of technical things that dominates job adverts, but actually the core skills for analytics, for a lot of analysis roles, again, back to the different levels, you might have a small number of people who absolutely do need to be fluent in Hive, Pig, C#, etc. But you look at job adverts from now 2 years ago and LinkedIn, but I don't think it's changed much. 60% still mention SQL. It's still the 3rd biggest language out there, and it's still the first one I'd look for in the CV. R and Python, yes, are more common now. Jupyter Notebooks is Python with a posh folder. So the only ones that it's a very small level of relatively simple languages that you can drive most of the value for, and are the most common ones you need to look at. Similarly, I think people will talk about a lot of advanced statistical modeling techniques, but if you're good at exploratory data analysis, that's probably 80% of the job in a lot of retailers. And that hasn't changed much since Tukey wrote the sort of textbook 40 years ago. If you can do descriptive statistics and understand a data set, if you can develop a hypothesis and carry out statistical inference and understand a bit of probability theory, you can build on there. It's a question of the groundwork as the basic skills are not as advanced as I think sometimes as an industry we make them out. The basics are rather simpler. And I think this drives the fact that our recruitment pool often looks at STEM science when it can look far wider. People in areas like geography and economics feed in really well into, I think, some of the recruitment pools. You start to get on next to the two, which I think are absolutely key that you get people that can do. And the first one of these is generate exceptional insight. So this is about using appropriate approaches to gather relevant data from multiple data sources and turn it into actionable or meaningful insight. So at a basic level, this can be people who can take data and I've always called this what, so what, and now what. The basic level, an analyst should absolutely be able to say what's happening from a data set and translate the data into a description. A senior analyst, I'd far more say, should be able to do so what, why is that important, what's going on, and really bring that to life for an audience. Work that out within the data set. And then now what? Actually, what should you do next and drive the insights that are predictive? So I think this, far more than technical, is the key skill set to being a great analyst, along with the last one in here, which is synthesis and communication. So this is the ability to communicate data and analytics to a diverse audience in a compelling and believable way that drives action. And again, just to look at that analyst, senior analyst principle, or whatever you might want to call the different levels, I think you can look at different levels of ability. So at a basic level, you want people who can clearly and succinctly communicate in an easily understandable, unambiguous way and ensure all business questions are answered. I think that's the basics. Moving from there, I'd move up into something like create a clear, compelling story that focuses on the so what's, articulates the potential impacts of insight to the business, and then moves on at a more senior level still to connects insights to a broader commercial picture or strategy, makes it easier for the stakeholders to turn insight into action. So I think this is the sort of key technical components of a competency framework. I think all good competency frameworks, though, have a second dimension to them, which is beyond the what do you do, also the how would you do it. And I think this gets into what skills, what other factors, what's the X factor when I interview a candidate that I'm kind of looking for, or what are those X factors to who I actually want to hire. And when HR have asked me about this, or when, like, so Josh has spoken to me about what do I look for and what gets a candidate through the interview into the door to be attacked by a dog looking like Batman. It's 5 C's, and the 5 C's that I talk about, the first one's common sense. And the reason I think this is important is data sets in an academic environment are all clean and lovely, and you've kind of got these nice data sets that you can learn things on. I've never seen a clean and lovely data set in my life. And it's so easy to actually do analytics that looks perfect, but actually it just isn't. And one example from early in my career, one of the first models I built back for a building society back in the 90s, I was asked to build a general insurance, a house buildings and contents insurance model. Built a model, wonderfully predictive, looked great. I thought I can identify these top 10% of people who are leaving. Went to see my boss, thought I'd discovered the Holy Grail. He kind of looked at me. That my problem was I was kind of saying, look, people who close their mortgage with us down, that their buildings and contents is gone within a month. He just goes, yeah, because we don't sell it as a standalone product. So if we lose the mortgage, we have to close the buildings and contents. It's like, oh, shit. Back to the drawing board, I'll kind of see you in a week. It's like, you see, you kind of learn that you need that bit to look at the data and work out what's rubbish, basically. The other one is curiosity. I think all good analysts need to be inherently curious. I'd love to leave a Meccano set or some Lego in the entrance of the building and see who starts taking the Meccano apart and trying to build something with it. But I think this is about actually, in particular for me, doing things like going out into stores and watching how people shop a store. I've told the story an awful lot about, in my time at Boots, we used to do 3 for 2 promotions on everything. We did a 3 for 2 on nappies that was working well in some stores and not others, and we couldn't find anything in the data that really said why. So me and one of the senior analysts went out and stood in the Broadmarsh store in Nottingham and watched the fixture. And as soon as you take that level of curiosity into it and watch, we saw one young mum push a buggy up to the fixture, take the kid out of the buggy, and she gave a small child one bag of nappies, put the other into the buggy and fastened it, and took the other under her arm, and then tried to get out the front of the shop onto her bus. We kind of dashed out, showed her the badges, so we said we weren't loonies, and helped her on the bus, and then went and had a coffee. And at that stage, we kind of went away and said, what if we overlay NCP type car park data near our stores? The promotion worked where we had car parks and didn't where we didn't. Or there was access to car parks. You'd have never got that without actually starting to be really curious about what's going on. I've already touched on statistics and communication, so I won't kind of go on at length about this, but I think communication is again an absolutely vital skill set. To quote Kipling, if history were taught in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten. That ability to communicate is absolutely key. And creativity. I've had this argument with lots of marketing people that kind of think creativity is the domain of the people who kind of design the TV adverts, the direct mail creatives, etc. And to me, analytics is fundamentally creative. I spent quite a lot of time working in credit card analytics 15 years ago. And one of the key variables in credit cards is always a thing called balanced credit limit ratio. And the interesting thing, which just tells you how close to your credit limit do you sail every month, because it tells you all sorts of interesting things about people's behavior. But the interesting thing to me is that's not a variable that all of the transactions will be on the file, the amount people have spent, where they spent it, how much interest they've paid. But balanced credit limit ratio doesn't show up anywhere as a natural variable. Somebody sat down and thought, oh, what if at some stage, I believe it was somebody at Fair Isaac in the early 70s, but that to me is a kind of Picasso moment of creative genius for analytics. It needs people who can kind of bring that invention and actually go, oh, what if I do this? And then the last one, which is my favorite, which is collaboration. And this is stolen straight from a book by James Kerr on why the All Blacks are one of the most successful sports teams ever. And they have about 15 simple rules for how the All Blacks culturally work. And one of the basic ones is no dickheads, which is however technically gifted somebody is, however great a player, basically, if they've not got the right attitude or their attitude sucks, they do not get to play in the shirt. And I think it's true in analytics as well. However analytically genius you might be, however talented, a talented dickhead is still fundamentally a dickhead. It just destroys team morale, and basically you can't get away with hiring talented muppets. So I think, yes, it can feel occasionally like you're trying to search for the mythical data science unicorn. But I think if you have the right sort of framework, understand the skills you're really looking for and how you develop, you can actually build a very successful team and make sure you're getting people with the right attitudes and talents, and that you're able to keep them. And I think that's the end of the slides. I'm hoping I'm about on the half hour, but obviously I couldn't see because I had the screen up.
That's fantastic, Martin. Thanks very much for that. Some very quotable Martin Squires sayings there.
I figured out that if you were taping, I had to tone down the swearing on Jar Jar Binks as well. What I referred to him as on the dry run earlier probably couldn't be used.
Brilliant, mate. But no, in terms of timing, Martin, you were perfectly on the